I'm about to give you a completely free, comprehensive training tutorial and video manual on the Pioneer DJ CDJ-3000 multiplayers. These are a unit which you'll find in nightclubs, in festivals, in pro DJ environments the world over. They're as close as we've got to an industry standard piece of DJ technology, especially when they're paired with a Pioneer club mixer. This setup here is what you'll find and what you'll be expected to use and play on, unless you specify something different when you step up to play in a pro environment. So maybe you want to learn how to use these because exactly that, you've been asked to go and play in a club and it's time to gen up on how club gear works. Maybe you've ordered some of these and you're waiting for them to arrive and you want to know how they work so you can hit the ground running when they arrive. Or maybe you've got some and you're looking for some extra help to get the most out of them. Whatever your reason, this tutorial is for you. Now, if you're coming to these units from DJ gear from another manufacturer or from other Pioneer DJ equipment, then there's a table of contents underneath, and that's going to be your key, your index to finding what you want. Just hit Control or Command and F, and then type in the word you want, and you'll find the table of contents will show you where to click, and then you can click straight through to that part of this tutorial to get the exact information you need. You know, this is a video tutorial, so feel free to come back to it again and again and again. It's very long. If you are brand new to DJing though, I've got to warn you that there's not going to be enough in this tutorial alone to teach you how to DJ. Yes, I can tell you how to work these pieces of equipment, but this is only one of the 5 big areas you need to master to DJ. This is your gear, but there's 4 other big areas as well. There's the music, there's the actual techniques of DJing, there's playing out, and there's being able to promote yourself. Unless you can combine your gear knowledge with those other 4 big areas, then you will get frustrated and you won't make progress. You know, I remember when I first started DJing, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have videos like this, we didn't have online resources. I learned on crappy Gemini turntables and putting an awful lot of time in, and I got frustrated so often. I nearly gave up so many times. I'm so glad I didn't, because DJing has given me my whole life. It's given me some of the best times of my life, playing with my heroes, playing in the best nightclubs in the world, and recently building the biggest DJ school in the world. So I offer you that promise. Yes, you're going to get frustrated, but my job as your teacher is to help you get past that. The way we teach here at Digital DJ Tips is very much based around practical DJing. It's about getting out there and doing it in front of other people. We don't want you stuck in your bedroom learning all the wrong things for months or even years, when just a few gigs in front of other people could have given you more knowledge than all those frustrating bedroom sessions added up. So everything we do is based around those big 5 areas of DJing: gear, music, techniques, playing out, promoting yourself, but also based about getting you in front of an audience. We wrote about that in our book, Rock the Dance Floor, which you can get on Amazon as an audio book, you can get it as a Kindle book, and in all good bookstores. I'll give you some information about where to get a free copy of this a little bit later on. But also, we have a course called the Complete DJ course. It will teach you how to DJ like a pro on not only this gear, but any DJ gear, from turntables up to using DJ apps on your phone and everything in between. It's a phenomenal investment in your DJing. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how to get the Complete DJ course later on as well. There's links to everything I've just mentioned underneath me. There's an awful lot for us to get through in this next couple of hours, so I think it's time we got started. So 2 crucial things you need to know right from the off. Number 1, any music that you play on your CDJ-3000s for best use should be analyzed in Rekordbox software. That's when you're going to get the most out of these. Now, Rekordbox software is a free music management and DJ application that you can get from Pioneer DJ. It looks a little bit like this. This is it set in its export mode, and you're going to use this to prepare your music library, which you're then going to put onto a USB pen drive or an SD card. At that point, you're going to take that card to the equipment in a club, and you're going to plug your card in and DJ with the equipment in a club. And then afterwards, you're going to take that SD card or that USB stick, and you're going to go back to your home computer, and you're going to plug it in your studio or in your home, and you're going to take the history back from the SD card or the USB drive, which is going to then update the main master Rekordbox library, which has been prepared by that piece of software on your computer. Really important to understand those 3 steps: export, DJ from card or stick, and then import again at the end to update anything that's changed, including your playlist histories and so on, from that card back to the master on your computer. Now, something else really important to know right at the beginning, and you can see it on here. I have here a powered Ethernet switcher, just a simple little basic TP link in my case, powered Ethernet switcher, which is plugged in, and these Ethernet cables here are going to both of the CDJ-3000s. If you had 4 CDJ-3000s, you'd have 4 of them plugged in here. This is also actually plugged into the mixer, because the mixer is designed to also take information this way through Pro DJ Link, which is what Pioneer calls this protocol. And you could also plug in your computer for extra functionality. But it's really important you do this, because otherwise the units won't talk to each other and won't work as they're designed to work. This isn't something that's in the box. You'll have to get yourself an Ethernet switcher and plug that in yourself, although the cables happily are supplied in the box. Now, I said you can plug your computer into this as well. And one reason that you might want to do this is to use something called Rekordbox Link Export. And that will let you DJ with these without having to go through that stage of exporting your music to a USB pen drive or a SD card and plugging it in here, because it will just use the library that's on your laptop as almost like a big hard drive in order to populate these units with all the information they need for you to DJ. So if you don't want to do the export stage, you can do all the preparation as we just discussed in the software on your computer, and then turn up at the club and plug one lead in from the box here to your computer and DJ straight from the library that's on your computer that way. It's not the same as DJing with a computer running DJ software, although you can do that with these, as we'll find out. It's just meaning you don't have to do that import and export mode, because you plug in the same computer directly into the units in the club. And finally, you can also plug in, as we're going to find out, your mobile devices in order to DJ straight from a phone. And this can be very useful if you have, for instance, downloaded some tunes on the Rekordbox app on a phone and you haven't had time to add them to your main library. Well, this way you can plug your phone in and you can DJ from those pre-analyzed tracks done on your phone and mix them into your DJ set without having to have them on the card that you're using or the USB drive, or indeed the computer. So it's just another way of getting music into the system. For the next few minutes, we're going to take a tour of one of our CDJ-3000s. Let's use this one here. And I'm simply going to talk you through what the buttons, switches, knobs, and faders are on the unit. Actually using them is something we'll come to later. Once we've looked at the top, we'll pop around the back and look at what's on the back. Then we'll have a quick talk about the screen before finally talking about the jog display in the middle here. So starting down here, we'll go roughly clockwise. This is the play pause button for playing and pausing your music. The cue button for queuing up your track at a certain point. Search and track search will move you backwards and forwards both through your tracks and through your individually selected track. The direction button, forward, reverse, or something called slip reverse, which is quite a useful way of reversing a track and then going back to where you would have been had you not quickly hit reverse. Used for getting rid of curse words and so on. This is a beat jump. Now this is quite a useful thing. Unlike the jump buttons here, this one will jump forward and backwards but retaining the time so that the track doesn't sound like it's jumped. A useful way of quickly searching through the track that's currently playing without your audience realizing it. These are our loops, 4 and 8, so that will give you an immediate 4-beat loop and an immediate 8-beat loop. Underneath it says half times and 2 times, and these are the controls that let you double or half the length of the currently playing loop. Here are our in and out buttons for setting a manual loop. This button here will exit from the manual loop, or it will jump back to one that we set previously. So these are all the loop controls. Again, we have an in and out adjust button here, which will let us adjust by, I'll show you how to do this a little bit later on, adjust the in and out points of our loop. This is a button that decides how these hot cue buttons work, whether we are going to be playing them or deleting them. These 2 buttons here are performance buttons. The slip button allows you to do something to the currently playing track, and then when you're finished, it will jump to where it would have been had you not done that thing. I'll demonstrate that later. Quantize keeps everything nicely in time and can tighten up your performances. This button here will decide whether the clock ticks up or ticks down. In other words, whether it shows time played or time elapsed on here. Now we're up into the area where we can plug in our SD cards or our USB cards. They've got little covers on here to protect them. Each of these areas has got a light. There's a light strip there and a light around here to show you that that's loaded and working. And this button here, USB stop, you hold this down until the light goes off and then you yank your USB out so that it kind of comes out gracefully. Now let's move over to the buttons above the screen here. This is a big, nice touch screen, which is a big improvement over the CDJ-3000. So the source button here is to choose an input. Now we've got nothing plugged in here yet, so it's saying no device, but if we had something plugged in, that would be where we choose our input. The browse button will let us browse through whatever we are currently looking at in the source. The tag list will give us a list of tracks that we've marked with a tag. I'll show you how we mark them with a tag later on. I'll show you the button that does that in a second. Playlist will bring up a list of playlists on our selected source. And search brings up a keyboard that lets us type in and quickly search for a track. The menu button will bring up any menu for the currently selected screen. And also by holding this down, you go to this utility menu here, which has got so much stuff that you can change about the player. And again, a little bit later on, we will talk through everything that's in that utility menu. Here then we have our selector, which lets us scroll up and down through things, and also by pressing down on it, selecting things. There's a back button. There's also a tag track or remove tag from track button. This will put tracks into the tag list I talked about earlier. It's a nice way of quickly tagging tracks that you want to play next, for instance. This is our track filter and edit button. This is another way of finding a track you want to play next, which is very powerful. Again, we'll be looking at that later. And this shortcut button here gives us a whole load of shortcuts, and some of these are configurable as well. So we can very quickly get to things that you can see here, such as the values for the beat jump buttons that we looked at earlier, the values for the quantize button that we looked at earlier. We'll talk about all this stuff later. Brightness, jog LCD brightness, and lots of other things. So let's move down here then. The cue, loop and call, delete and memory. This is another way, it's kind of a legacy way of marking cue points on your tracks, which is there in addition to the kind of more modern cue points along the top. But a lot of DJs still like to use this, and we'll touch on that. Vinyl speed adjust decides how quickly the track stops when you hit the stop button. In other words, it can make it sound like a piece of vinyl slowing down instead of stopping instantly. And indeed, you can set this to be like a DJ turning a turntable off at the end of the night, which can sound really cool as well. And it can also be set for the startup speed too. This button here decides whether the jog wheel acts like a record or a classic CDJ, which doesn't have the kind of ability to scratch like this, but works in a different way. So this is where you decide whether you want to use the vinyl mode or the CDJ mode. This is the jog adjust. Now this is a mechanical button. You can feel it doing something, and what it's doing is pushing a pad against the jog wheel. So when you have this set on heavy, this doesn't spin. You know, as soon as my hand leaves it, it's not going round anymore. We put it on light, it'll spin around forever or for a long time. So this is basically what field you want for your jog wheel. So here we have some sync buttons. This decides whether this is the deck that any other deck syncs to, and that's what master means. It says master player on the screen there, or whether it's just to sync to another deck. So if I press on the other deck master, you'll see it goes off on this one because this is the one that this one is now syncing to. Beat sync will immediately get this in sync with anything else that's playing. And there's a key sync button here as well, which will match the key, which is really very nicely done on the CDJ-3000. We'll be talking about that later. So down here are our tempo controls, and there's 4 of them. One big tempo fader or slider and 3 controls here. This decides how quickly, or rather how much, the track is slowed down, and you push up to slow it down, maybe counterintuitively if you're not used to this kind of thing, but you push up to slow down, just like on a turntable, and you pull down to speed up. This decides what percentage, 6, 10, 16, or wide, which is a lot. The track slows down or speeds up when you do this. This here is a reset button, so I could speed the track up a lot, hit reset, and it'll go back to 0, even though the fader's up here. So it can be used creatively, this, or it can be used to just lock it so this doesn't do anything. And this master tempo button is sometimes called key lock on other DJ systems. The master tempo button decides whether, when you speed up or slow down the tempo slider, or what is often called the pitch slider, because in traditional turntable terminology, the pitch goes down when you slow it down, and the pitch of the tune, or the key of the tune, goes up when you speed it up. This locks that so that the tune can be sped up a lot without it sounding chipmunky, and it can be slowed down a lot without the tune going too low. Moving around to the back of the unit, this is our power on off button. Here are our audio outs. Now we've got an analog audio out, which I'm using here, and there's also a digital audio out, which is actually the better one to use if your mixer can take a digital audio in. This is our main power input. It's what we call kettle lead. I think they're called IEC leads, and the provided ones have got a lock on them, which are well worth using just for extra reassurance that they're not going to get accidentally yanked out. Here is the Pro DJ link, otherwise known as an Ethernet connection. And then finally at the end here is a USB output for plugging directly into a computer, and we'll talk about why you may want to do that later on. Just tucked underneath this, possibly out of view on the computer, is a Kensington lock socket for making the player a little bit more theft proof. Now before we go any further, I'm going to actually update the firmware on these units, and the reason for that is we've now reached talking about the screen, and these units haven't been used for a little while and they're on older firmware, and they're telling me that. They're saying update to latest version. Now if you're not sure whether your unit needs the latest version of the firmware, an easy way to check is to hold down the menu button to get to the utility screen and look at the top corner, and it tells you the version of the firmware you're on, 1.11 there, and you can just check that against the latest version over on the Pioneer DJ website. Now I definitely need to update the firmware on these, so we're going to go to the website, go to support, go to find software and firmware updates, select the CDJ-3000, and then look for the latest version of the firmware, which is at the top here. Use the download link, get that firmware into your downloads folder or onto your computer, and copy it onto a drive that's been formatted in FAT32, which is one of the kind of older ways of formatting drives. You can't use the modern Mac way, for instance. You need it to be in FAT32. There's a couple of other ways you can format it, but you'll never go wrong with FAT32. Eject that, and then you can pull that out of your computer and head over to your players. Time to upgrade them. So here's how we do it. So the first thing we want to do is turn the player off. Then unplug any drives that might be plugged into it, and certainly unplug any connections to computers or the Ethernet or that kind of thing. So we're going to head around the back and just quickly unplug those now. Now we're going to turn the player on again, but this time I'm going to hold down a couple of buttons which tells the player that we're going into a firmware upgrade mode. I'm going to hold down the in and Q button and the reloop and exit button and turn it on. And wait, and it'll tell me on the screen that it is waiting for me to insert a USB drive, connect USB storage device into top USB port. So we'll do that now, and then we wait, and the unit will read the firmware on that source, and it will force the update. Checking update file, please wait, it says on there. And then in a minute or so, it will have completed that update. And then we want to do exactly the same thing once this one is finished over on the other one in order to make sure we're running the latest firmware. And it's always worth checking this, even though you may decide that everything's working fine, because things change, software changes. For instance, if you want to use it with the latest Mac or PC operating systems, it may well be that without this firmware, it won't work properly. And you're never going to get the latest features without upgrading the firmware. So always keep your firmware up to date. So this is now saying firmware update is complete. Turn the power off and on before using. We'll turn that off. We'll unplug that. I'll plug the network connections back in behind it and then turn it on again, and we're back with the latest firmware on this one. So I'm going to go and do the other one now, and then we'll carry on our tour with the features of the unit. Right, we're all set up. Let's have a look at the source screen. So the source screen is where we select what we want to play on the player. At the moment, there's only one source available to me here. It is this USB drive of Rekordbox analyzed music. So there's a few things we're being shown here. This is what the thing is, the USB drive. That's why it says USB on there. This is the name. It hasn't been named, so it just says no device name. Now this has a color. You can see this is pink, and it's pink here as well. So I can change the color by clicking on this little button here and choose any color I like for this. It's quite a nice little feature, and then later on this will light up as well. So it just shows you which of your USBs you've got plugged in. You can use different colors for them if you want. Down here is a bit of information. So we've got the songs, the playlists, the date that this was created, and the space available on there. And then you can load your settings from the USB drive as well. And this can be really useful because you can set things inside the Rekordbox software that set the player up how you want it to be, and that button will load those settings for you. The next screen to show you is the browse screen. It's somewhere you're going to be spending an awful lot of time. So this is our source. I'll select the source and we go into browse. You can see that we've got our tracks down here. We're browsing our music. And so down this side are our categories. So artist, album, track, playlist, history, and so on. And you can choose which categories are displayed here in the preferences menu. Up here, USB, the pink color that we set so we know where we are. This little button here will just take us back. This little arrow will take us back to where we were before. So it's just a way of moving back up the folders to the next higher level. So depending on where we are, we're going to see different things here. I'm now looking at a track. I've got preview here, which brings the preview window here. I can tap on these for various features that we'll look at later. You've got a font size here, so you can set this to wherever it suits your eyes. We also have an info button here, which brings up more info about the selected track there. Pressing the name at the top of a column lets you sort by that column, and pressing it again will sort in the other direction by that column. And pressing this little up and down arrow button here will give us the ability to put another field in there. So we're currently looking at the track name, but I can add artist in there as well. I can add rating and so on, depending on how you want to lay out your information here. And there is various information at the bottom here about the playback status. Because there's nothing loaded onto this deck yet, there's no playback status to look at, apart from this little number here, which is where the pitch fader is set to. Now let's take a look at the waveform screen. This is the big screen that you're going to spend a lot of time in if you're not in this one here. So the waveform screen is where you see the waveforms. Now I've actually loaded a track onto this deck and onto this deck. And by the way, to load a track, there's loads of ways of loading a track. We're going to look at this. In a little while formally, but you just tap on a track. You see it says the word load there. That's one way of doing it. So I've got tracks loaded on both so that I can show you how they interact again. This is another reason why it's a good idea to have your devices networked together, because without that you wouldn't see the information on one player from the other. Let's get started then. Just a general, very fast talk through, and then we're going to come back to the main things that I brush over here later on. So right in the middle, this little arrow, this little number 4 is the number of beats set for a loop. This waveform here, the really big one, is the enlarged waveform. We can zoom in and out on it like this. The one at the bottom is actually showing us the whole track from beginning to end. And each of these little markers here are showing us the minutes through the track. The little countdowns here are beat countdowns, which will show us various countdowns to parts of the track. Currently, this green one is showing us the countdown from our play point to the next cue point. The little icon here we've seen before, also at the top here, I forgot to point that out, is our pink color, telling us not only the drive we've got plugged in, but also the color of the drive, so that we get that kind of player-wide color coding. This is the info about the track. Clearly, this is telling us the name of the track and also the length of the track, the BPM of the track, original BPM of the track, and the key of the track here as well. And this little eye we can tap to show more information about the track than can be shown at the top here. We've got count information here for the beat loop. This is looping, key shifting, and beat jumping. All the numbers for those can be brought up here. I'm going to show you more about these later on. This is again just to show you how this works. At the top here is a waveform from our other deck. This waveform corresponds to the waveform over here on this deck, and I can tap this and it'll just give us the beat counters and the bar counters, which can be very useful when you're playing two tracks together to line those things up and to make sure they're in sync. So tapping this will change that to either waveform or the phase meter. And then the adjustments here, I've already shown you that one, but we can also hold this button down, and then that grid there is now adjusting the beat grid of the track. by moving this, and this is the beat grid controls that have come up here. We'll talk more about beat gridding a little bit later on. So the number of beats for quantizing the track can be shown by looking here. See, it says quantize 1. That means that when we hit the quantize button, it's going to jump to the nearest beat. Now we can change that here. So I'm holding down the shortcut button again. Here's our quantize values. Again, quantize will basically tidy up your mix and make sure everything happens on the beat or on the half beat, quarter beat or eighth beat. And that's where that is changed. While we're in here, here's our beat jump values. When we use the beat jump buttons, this is how far it's going to jump backwards and forwards in the track while retaining the current phase, so that we can do this while we're playing a track and it stays in beat with the other track. Currently, it's going to jump 32 beats through the track when you press these buttons, and you can see it jumping 32 beats through the track here. Again, we're going to talk more about this later, just giving you an overview of all the stuff that's on the unit. This A hot cue is telling us that the auto load hot cue is switched on. There's also a auto cue that could be switched on and off here, which again, we're going to talk about in a little while. Right. Time. This is the time that is elapsed on the track. Let's tap this. Now it's the time that's remaining on the track, and it says remain there to tell you that. Single is telling us that this is only going to be played once, although we could switch this so that it's going to continue to play the track that follows, and this can be set in the utility menu, which we'll come back to later. The playback speed adjustment range is what we're looking at here. See, it says ±6. If I move the tempo fader up and down, it's moving up and down by 6%. But if I press the tempo button, I can change that to 10%, 16%, or wide, which will take it all the way down to 100 and all the way up to 100 as well. So this is where we know, without having to touch anything, what this is set to. And you can see the BPM is moving along with that as well. Now, if I press the master button here, it turns this into the master deck. Any other decks will sync to this one when we hit beat sync. And the way we know that is because it says master here. You see master there by the BPM. If I press master on the other deck, that master disappears, and indeed it moves over to the other deck. So if I turn the master tempo on, remember this stops the deck going up or down in pitch when we move this, then we get a little MT here just telling us that that master tempo is on. If I turn the master tempo off, then you can actually see the key is moving, because if we were playing a track now, you'd hear the pitch going up and down as we did that. And even though the key is changing there, it's not changing at the top, because this is telling us the original key of the track. Now let's look at some of the things you can see on this overall waveform here. I'm going to zoom in a bit. So you can see we've got our cue points A and B. This is cue points A and B here. It's showing us where they are on the track. You can see this grayed area here. This is our 4-beat loop that we could switch on, which corresponds to the number 4 there. And various other stuff will show on the waveforms as well, including our current point, which is marked by this here, cue points, and so on. The waveform is the place you're going to spend a lot of time looking at, both this one, and that one, whether you are looking at whether the tracks are in sync, what's coming next on the track, or literally what's going to happen in the next few seconds on the track. So before we move on to setting up our computer and starting to get everything working, there's one final thing we haven't looked at yet, and that is what goes on this center part here, the screen inside the jog wheel. It's really simple. You've got your artwork in the middle, which is pulled from the currently loaded track. This word here, vinyl, is telling you you're in vinyl mode, and you can also set it into CDJ mode by pressing the jog button there, and that will turn that on or off. This little word here, I can light up here, which is slip mode. You also get this kind of bronze ring to tell you that you're in slip mode as well. Down at the bottom, we've got a master, which tells us this is the master deck. If I turn the other deck into the master deck, that will go off. And equally, we have a sync button down here, a sync button here, which turns on the sync there, which just tells us that that is on. And they can both be on, or indeed neither of them can be on. This little marker here is showing us the movement of the jog wheel, which will play. And this marker here is showing us where the cue point is, which corresponds to the cue point on the screen. If I line those two up, you'll see that it lines up here as well. So let's cover off getting these working with your PC or with your Mac, and also getting them connected to the Ethernet. So it's pretty simple. Ethernet switcher. This is a cheap TP-Link 1 that I have here, powered, and I've got the 2 players plugged into the back of it. I've also got the mixer plugged into it. I've also got the internet plugged into it, but you don't need to do that. This is enough for you to then be able to use the sync functions and the master functions and share your libraries between the two and so on. They do recommend a 1 gigabit per second Ethernet switcher. This is a 10100 one, which is not 1 gigabit per second. It seems to work absolutely fine. One thing you're going to want to do when you plug these in, if you remember earlier, I said I got the numbers wrong. This player here was numbered number 2, and this was player was numbered number 1. Doesn't really matter, but something OCD tells me that 1 should be on the left. Hold down the utility button and then hold down Pro DJ link there, and you'll see the player number, and you need to unplug the player, and that will then let you choose the correct number that you want for the player, or just choose automatic and let it do it for you. Now, the next thing we want to do is get the computer working directly with these. Now, we're not talking about using DJ software on there or anything like that. We're talking about using the computer in what they call link mode. And link mode bypasses the need to export to a USB drive in order to play music on these. You can just use the supplied USB cable to plug directly into your computer and to get the music on your computer accessible via these, but they will then work in exactly the same way that they work with a USB drive. That you're not DJing, you're not using them like a DJ controller. You're simply using your computer like a big hard drive. So to do this, you need to install the correct software, especially if you're a Windows user. There's software that you need to put on here for the driver and so on. You can find this out by just heading over to the support page on their website. And here you'll find the firmware update and all other stuff for the CDJ-3000. So pioneerdj.com/support, select CDJ-3000, and then find out what needs to be put on your computer. You know, it's worth updating with any software that looks pretty cool because it won't do you any harm, and it will certainly save you doing it later when you suddenly realize you need it. Here's the Windows audio driver, for instance. Of course, you're going to need to install Rekordbox. That's taken as read because that's the software you're going to need for everything with these players. Analyzing. You can even DJ from Rekordbox with these. We'll get onto that if we've got time a bit later on. But Rekordbox is an important part. So once you've got the USB cable plugged between both of your players and the computer using a USB hub, if that's easier, and you've got your players networked together with Ethernet, that is all you need to then use the library on your Rekordbox on your computer, almost, as I say, like a big hard drive with all your music, and then you can just DJ from these in the normal way. And this is what it looks like. So this is the Rekordbox software in the same kind of view that you'd probably be using to prepare your music to export it to a USB drive. But at the bottom, we have this word link. Now, if I click on link, it will then give me on my players an extra source. See this one here? Phil's MBP 2019, Phil's MacBook Pro 2019. That is telling me that my computer is recognized, and I can now jump into this, and this is exactly the same as we were looking at on the USB drive. All my music is here to DJ with, and it's being accessed from the computer. And if I were to load a track here onto my deck on the computer, you see at the bottom right, that track is now loaded there and it's playing, or paused in fact. Now, it is a good idea to just switch to full browser view at the top here if you're going to DJ this way, because now you've got a huge record library sat here waiting for you to access. And some DJs, yes, you can access the music through the player by using the browse functions and so on, and that's fine, that will work, and nothing will happen on the screen as I'm turning that there. There's nothing going on the screen. That's fine. But some DJs like the idea of having a computer library to access here, because it's a lot quicker to jump around your collection on a computer than it is on the CDJ screens, even though they're like 10-inch screens. And you can grab tracks from here and just pull them directly onto a deck, and it will load onto that deck if they've been downloaded. Some of these haven't been downloaded. There you go. So that's loading onto the deck now, and you can see it's now appeared on this deck here. So there's a few ways of using it if you're using the link function. Just use it how it works for you. I like to use my laptop when I'm at home, quickly loading stuff onto the decks and auditioning my music. And then in the club, if I'm going to use the laptop because I haven't exported to USB, I'll probably just tuck the laptop away. And you can get utilities that will leave the laptop running even with the lid closed. So then you can just power it up, plug it in, tuck it under the desk and be DJing from your whole collection. Again, the main point of this is to stop you having to export to USB, but that's how you set that up. Worth pointing out that if you've got your computer on the same Ethernet network that you've got these on, then you don't actually need the USB cable. Also worth pointing out, you can plug two computers in, two laptops in for having two DJs with either method, Ethernet or USB. And if you've got a switching router, an Ethernet switch that's got Wi-Fi on it, then the computers can connect to that via Wi-Fi, and then they're still wired into the players, but then you don't even need to plug anything into your computer. So there's a few other ways of using Link to get the music into your computer other than just plugging a direct USB cable into that computer. However you get your music into the unit, you're going to have to select tracks and start playing them. So let's look at some of the tools you've got for track selection. So to remind you, you've got your source list here, and you're going to select a source to give you this list of tracks. This is the browse window. So in the browse window, we use our browse knob to move up and down through the tracks, and then you can push down to select the track that you've got. So for instance there, that's now loading that track that I pushed down on there. Back to the browse window then. You can see the recently played tracks, which is something I've not noticed on this unit before. If you're on this play window and you're playing a track and you just tap the menu button, it gives you a list of the tracks that you've recently played and you can load them back again. I guess this could be useful if you're doing mashups and you're moving backwards and forwards between tracks quickly, or I don't know, you could have some acapellas here that you're using all the time and so they're never disappearing. You could have your jingles here, and if you play them every 2 or 3 tracks, they're always going to be there. I'm not sure how you'd use this, but it's something, as I say, I've never noticed before, just to let you know that that's there. So probably more important is to know how to search for tracks. So you click search, and we looked at this earlier, but here you can see that we've got a search box here, so you can start typing whatever it is you want, and as soon as you get to a point where it's narrowed it down to whatever. Not that many tunes on here, so here's all the tunes with SA in them somewhere. For instance, that one there, Sakharin 374, but you could type in anything, type in the name of your artist or whatever, and it's going to narrow it down live as you're typing away to tell you what suits your search term. So another thing that's useful when it comes to searching for tracks is the ability to jump by alphabet. So if we just sort this list of tracks here by alphabetical order, it's only a small playlist, but nonetheless I can still show you. If I hold my hand down on the selector here, I get this number here, this letter, and you can see it's now taking me to the beginning of each letter of the alphabet that exists in this playlist. That's the first A, that's the first B, that's the first C, and so on, all the way through the playlist. So if you've got a bigger playlist than this can be a very quick way of just going to the beginning of a track where you know what the first letter is of the title of the track. So the other way of using this function is if you're not sorted by alphabet, you're sorted by something else like BPM or whatever, and you've got a big playlist, so it takes a long time to scroll through it. You can hold down on there, and now it's going to show you this little symbol here, which lets you jump by page. It'll jump a whole page at a time. So again, it makes it a lot quicker to scroll through the playlist if it happens to be a very big playlist. So there's 2 ways of using that track jump feature there. Now, Pioneer's CDJs have a track filter function, which I think is one of the most powerful things of these players, and if you haven't used this kind of system before, I predict going to love this. So track filter filters down depending upon your parameters, your library, and the idea is it helps you to pick the next track. So let's have a look at it. It's on the players and it's saved to the currently loaded source. So in other words, however you like this to be set will stay with your USB and will become part of what gets loaded whenever you plug your USB into any CDJ system, which is really cool. So you can narrow your tracks down by things like BPM or key, or the tag information that you've added in Rekordbox itself, if you have ways of tagging your tracks, and that can all be done from within here with the press of a single button. So before we actually press the button, and it's this little button here, before we press the button, it's probably best to show you the ways that you can set this up, because until you know how to set it up, there's not really an awful lot of point in pressing it. So in order to set it up, to edit your track filter, you hold this button down, and then you come to this screen here, which is the track filter screen. So on here, we can set the conditions which tell the player what tracks to show us in the library. So there's a few things here, let's talk through them. You have BPM, so you can say, okay, show me tracks that are within a certain BPM range. So it's currently set to 119 BPM plus or minus 2%, and that would be 116.6 to 121.4 BPM. In other words, it will only show you tracks that are within that range, and you can alter the percentage range there. That's also complemented by key. So we can turn on key and it will show us tracks that are in a compatible musical key according to received musical key theory, although this ought to really show us the tracks that correspond with the way their amazing new key sync function works. But anyway, too much for us to get into here. But anyway, there's a useful way there of getting compatible key. You can also have rating. So some people use rating for energy level, for instance. Rating 1 might be a very quiet track and rating 5 might be a real kind of crowd pleaser, real floor filler. And so you can decide which rating it shows you there. And you can color your tracks. In Rekordbox, you can give each track a color. So you might have kind of like light colors for vocal tracks and darker colors for deeper, more undergrounded tracks or whatever. So if you're kind of the kind of person that thinks in that way, you can filter by color. Now, the real thing with this, the real key with this, the real thing that makes this so powerful is that you can click master player. So what this does is tell it to take the information for BPM and key from the master player. So in other words, if the master player is playing a track that is at 120 BPM and you've got this set to give it plus or minus 4% from 120 BPM, that's what it's going to show you here. And if you have key on as well, it will give you tracks that are only in a compatible key. So let's have a look at that. Over on this deck here, we've got a track loaded that is at 120 BPM. It's actually playing a little bit slower now, so it's actually at 119 BPM. And that track is the one that's currently, let's for argument's sake say, that's the one that's playing to our audience right now. And that's the track that therefore we want to find something to mix into with. So let's go back to our full library here. This is our full library, it's everything we've got in our library, and it's like, well, what do I play next? I want something that's in a compatible key with this and also that's close by in BPM. Well, look, in here we've got all kinds of BPM ranges going on. Let's just get out of the info page there. I've got BPMs from 86 up to 160. So I want something that's going to mix with this, 119. And also this is in a particular key. I want something that's in a similar key as well. So because we know that in here, we've got master player set, we've got BPM set to give us stuff that's within 4% of 119. And let's actually tighten that up a bit. Let's tighten up to like 2%. So it's going to go anything from 116 to 121 BPM, which is easy enough to mix into. And also in a compatible key. So that's what we've got set there. So now pressing the track filter button will turn on or off the filter. And it's only showing us the tracks here that you can see 117, 117, 118 and 120, all close enough to the 119 going on over here. And also the keys here, when it lights up a key in green, it means it's a compatible musical key. Musical key over here is Camelot 4A, and we've got 5A, 4B. We've got C minor and F minor. Now, if you're into key mixing, thinking, why is it mixing these up? It's a really simple explanation for that. Basically, within my Rekordbox library, I've got a whole load of tracks analyzed in different software and with different systems. Rekordbox doesn't care. It sees the actual key no matter how it's being displayed and will give you those readouts. So as long as it's in green, it'll work. So that's a mixture of legacy music from all across my different software platforms and all through the years where I've had it in different key formats, but that's okay. The system can recognize that and work with it. So the important thing to remember here is that what you've got here is the tracks that are in a compatible key and that are in a BPM. That means you're not going to be moving it too far from the original BPM to mix. It's a massively powerful system, especially when you get into adding your own tags, because in here we can add things like genre, components, situation, and your own column. So genre is an easy one, you know, give me all the house music, and components could be that's got saxophone or piano or gnarly bass line or vocals or whatever. Situation could be back room, warm up, peak time, bar, club. These are all things you can set inside your Rekordbox when you're preparing your library on your computer. You can set it inside Rekordbox. You've got a tag section here in Rekordbox where you can tag tracks with, you can see here, situation. There's an untitled at the bottom. Components, synth, vocals, beats, so on. Genres, and you can edit all this in Rekordbox. This isn't a Rekordbox tutorial, but the point is once you've done this work in here, it will show in here and you can set your track filter to filter by it. So if you're playing a saxophone kind of half hour, you can filter from player to player using these things, and it's all part of the track filter section here, and then it turns on or off just by tapping that button while you're mixing. Like I say, I think this is one of the most powerful things about the CDJ-3000s, and they do it better than anyone else. So I'm going to use a pair of headphones now to show you something called Touch Preview. So if your mixer has got the Q link function on it, like this Pioneer DJ DJM 900 Nexus 2 has, then you can use the waveforms on the touchscreen to listen through tracks in the library without even having to load them onto the deck and use the normal cue functions. And so by pressing the cue button on the mixer and just touching the waveform in here, the headphones will play you the track, and you can move your finger left and right to scan through that track and decide whether it's something that you want to play. Now, the tracks you have played show in the history column here. You select history down the left-hand side, and you get one of these for each of the connected CDJs. And any track you've played for more than a minute will show in here, and these get saved onto the USB or SD card as well. And the reason they only show you the tracks that you saved for more than a minute is that you might be loading tracks onto the decks just to have a quick listen to them. Maybe you haven't got the link queue that I just showed you there, and so you're loading tracks onto the deck to listen, and they're not actually playing them. So if you've played them for a whole minute, it kind of thinks, well, that's definitely been used in the DJ set. And then because they're kept on the SD card or the USB drive, when you put that back into your computer, you can take that history and put it back onto your master collection, if you like, your master record box. And then you've got a history of everything you played at that gig, which can be a really useful thing for DJs to keep. To finish our tour of the important features of the library, I want to show you tag list. Tag list is really useful for doing the equivalent of, if you've ever DJ with vinyl, you'll know this, pulling the tracks halfway out of the record box, right? You flick through a box of records saying, I might play that one next, I might play that one next, I might play that one too. And you end up with half a dozen tracks half out, right? And then for the next maybe 20 minutes of the set, you're just going to play from those. And then when you've kind of exhausted that train of thought, you push them back and you'll have another flick through. It's a way of preparing tracks so you can quickly get to them temporarily in order to play them next. So here's how you do it. So we're going to use tag list, which we've had a brief introduction to before. Remember, tag list has got its own button at the top here. Our tag list is currently empty. So I'm viewing my tracks here and just assuming I'm looking through my tracks and I think, oh, that would be a good one to play next. I press the tag track button there. I get a little tick against that track and it flashes for a second. So meanwhile, I'm continuing to look through. Oh yeah, that would be a good one. I like the look of that too for now. And that. And you keep going until you've kind of ready to continue. So at this stage, they're all tagged. And to see those, we press the tag list button at the top here, and there's all the tracks that we've got tagged. So now you can load tracks from here. As soon as you load them, they're going to go onto the deck and they're going to be played, and then you've kind of like, it's done its job. But you can also play with this tag list in a few ways. So if you decide you actually don't want to play a track from here, you can hold down the tag track remove button and keep your hand on it this time, and it just disappears. You see how that disappeared? And now we've only got 3 there. If you are in this menu, if you just like browsing through your lists and you are looking at tracks to play and you notice you've put something into a tag list, as we have here, it's got the little tick on it, and actually you didn't want that, you can just tap the tag track button to get rid of it. So that's now no longer in the list. So when we go back to the list, there'll only be 2 tracks there now. So there's a couple of things you can do in here as well. By holding down the menu, pressing the menu button, which, remember, the menu button will always bring up relevant menus wherever you are in the system, you get a couple of other options. You can actually create a playlist from this, and you can turn your tracks into an actual playlist. So this could be really good for making playlists on the fly. You could actually sit there, 10 minutes before a set, go through your whole collection and make a whole playlist for the night if you wanted, just by using this method. Or if you don't need it anymore, whatever reason, you can remove all the tracks from here as well using remove tracks there, and just click OK on that, and then they'll all disappear from the tag list. So a couple of ways of manipulating the tag list there. Let's look at some basic playback functions. So to play and pause a track, we press the play pause button down at the bottom here. You want to jump quickly to another place in the track, then while it's paused, just use the main waveform at the bottom, the main full track waveform, and touch where you want to go. As long as you're paused, it will jump straight to that point. You don't have to press the play pause button, you can just hold the top of the jogwheel as well to do it. That'll do the same thing for you there. Now to play a track backwards, press this button here into reverse. This starts to go backwards to show you that, and you can see everything's going backwards on the screen there as well. Now, if you want to search to a different track in the playlist, use track search here. Let's jump forward to the next track there and back there. Press it twice quickly to get back a track, because once quickly will just take you to the beginning of the track. So next track, beginning of current track, or twice to go back to the previous track there. Now, if you just want to search through the current track, using the search buttons here will do that for you, like this. You can see that happening really quickly. If you want to go even faster, hold the search button and turn the jog wheel, and then that's a super fast search through the track. Now, if you want to do what's called a frame search, and a frame search is jogging very, very, very finely at a certain point in the track. So I'll pause here, and to do a frame search, while you're paused, tap the search buttons. Now you can see not much happening on the waveform, but if you look here, you can see it's going very, very, very slowly, like in hundredths of a second. But if you want to zoom in, then we can see a little bit closely what's going on here. So this can be useful, as we're going to talk about later, setting cue points to get them exactly where you want them to be. Now let's talk about the tempo. We've already very briefly looked at this, so I just want to quickly go over this and show you a couple of things that maybe we didn't cover in the detail I'm about to. So again, the tempo down and up will slow and speed the track up. Let's get it playing again. You can hear that slowing down and speeding up. This again will make it go more or less. So that's set to wide, which is the biggest change in tempo possible. And that's the least possible, just 6%, and that's showing you on here. Master tempo will turn off the pitch correction. So now it will actually get lower as we slow it down. And again, we looked at this earlier when we were looking at this key function, didn't we? But just to go over that again. And then pressing tempo reset, put the tempo to 0. Effectively, that's not working now. And that's just playing at the speed that the track should be at. Now you've seen me using the jog wheel. To most people who've used DJ gear before, jog wheels don't need any explanation at all. There's nothing unusual about these, but maybe you haven't used DJ gear before. So let's quickly look at how jog wheels work and the thinking behind them. So clearly these are based on what turntables used to be like. And so when you're playing a track, you have this turntable kind of feel. Like spinning a turntable back and forward. The track's playing, and I'm just grabbing the jog wheel to do that. Now, if I touch the edge of the jog wheel, you get a different behavior. You can hear this is slowing the track down, but not stopping it, and speeding it up. Sometimes called pitch bending, sometimes called nudging. It can be used for getting tracks in time with each other. That's normally when DJs do this. So just remember that there's two behaviors there. Now, if the track's paused, actually it doesn't matter where you touch the jog wheel. It will do the same vinyl type behavior, because the makers assume that if the track's paused, it's paused because you're either ready to play it or you're ready to look for a place you want to play it from. So there's no point in having that kind of nudge behavior there. You already know that if you want to very quickly move finely through a track, you can just use the search buttons here. If it's too fine, then touching the jog wheel to get to the place you want to get to. So there's another mode on the jog wheels, which is called CDJ mode. And this is almost a legacy mode. I'll press the jog mode button at the top to get into CDJ mode. So here, we've still got our nudge at the edge, but we also have our nudge on top. So there's no scratch at all in this mode. And this is how CDJs used to play, how the original DJ CD players used to play, because they didn't have the technology to let you scratch them. So the whole jog wheel was basically a big nudge wheel or a big pitch shift wheel. A lot of DJs still like this because they don't scratch and they don't want to accidentally find themselves doing this. So you have your choice there of modes. Do bear in mind that in CDJ mode, when you press pause, the music doesn't stop. When you press pause, the music continues to play the currently playing frame of music over and over again. And again, this is legacy stuff from the old CDs, but it can be quite useful, because say I want to get to the beginning of this beat here, and I'm in this mode, you can hear quite clearly where the beat kicks in. So it's just worth bearing in mind that, but also if you hear your CD player, or I say CD player, they don't play CDs anymore, but you know what I mean, if you hear your player making that noise, and you think, what's going on, what's gone wrong? You've probably just tapped that button by mistake. Now, we talked earlier about how you can adjust the jog wheel mechanically using this. This will allow the wheel to really spin when you spin it if you set it to light, but if you set it to heavy, get nowhere near that looseness on the wheel. It's a personal preference. Another thing that's a personal preference is the vinyl speed adjust. Vinyl speed adjust decides how quickly the track stops playing when you hit pause. That's pretty instant, right? It doesn't have to be like that. If I set vinyl speed adjust a bit higher, it sounds like you're pressing stop on a record deck. Very natural sounding thing for a DJ to have their music sound like that when they press stop. If I set it all the way, it sounds like you're literally turning a turntable's power off at the end of the night and turning the lights up and everyone's cheering because they know the night's finished. Now notice when I press start, there's none of that. It's starting straight away, right? So this is only happening when we press stop. But you can change that behavior by holding down the menu button to get to the utility menu, and then in DJ settings, going down to vinyl speed adjust. So here we can adjust touch release or touch and release. And what this means is you can decide whether what I just showed you happens when you stop the track, when you start the track, or both. So I'll set it to both now. And then you'll see that when I press start and stop, can you hear that? Taking a little while to start. If I put this higher, it's taking a long time to start and a long time to stop. So you have that choice in the utility menu, and if you want, you can set that to the only start. So release would be only start. So now when we press play, it starts slowly but stops instantly. Most DJs, like the vast majority of DJs, probably never discover that setting, or if they do, will leave it set to touch because that's the one that makes the most sense. Having it starting instantly, but having a nice little vinyl slowdown when you hit stop. Now, one button we've skirted over so far is the Q button. So Q is used to mark a point in a track that you want to return to at some point. Qs are useful because it saves you having to manually use the jog wheel to find a place in the track to start and leave the track there when you press play. You can use a Q point to add a marker there that's easy to get back to. So when we want to set a Q point, the track has to be paused and we find the place we want to set the Q point and we hit Q. So now I've got a point marked on the track. You can see this little arrow here that's telling me that is the currently set cue point. If I want to jump to a cue point that's already been set, when the track's playing, I hit cue and we're back to that cue point, and you can see we've gone back to that point in the track near the beginning where I pressed that cue point. And you'll notice the track stops when we reach that point, and then you hit play to play from there. Now, if you want to set a cue point while you are currently playing, obviously pressing the Q button is not going to do it because that's going to jump us back to the previously set Q point. So the way to do that is to press the in Q button here, the first of the two yellow buttons at the top here, and that will set a Q point there. So now the Q point, and I'll do it again so you can see, look out for the little arrow at the bottom here. There it goes. So now when I press the Q button, we jump back to that point in the track. Should I wish to check what my cue point sounds like, I've just set a cue and I want to listen to it, you press the cue button and just keep your hand on it. So we've gone back to there, press and keep your hand on it. It's just cue check, but also it's called cue sample because you can use it for creative effect as well. Now, if you've done that, and you want to carry on playing, you don't want to stop when you take your finger off, just tap the play button and it'll carry on playing from there. Now, if you've got a cue point that you want to save, because an important thing to remember about cue points is that you can only have one set at a time, because as soon as you set a new cue point, the old one will be overridden, if you like. It will just disappear and the cue marker will move to where you just set the new one. Just press the memory button here, and that is now saved to memory. It says memory there. Now, being able to set and record cue points into memory is a good thing because it means you can set cue points at big places in the track and then they're easy to recall. So let's do that. Let's go to a big place in the track. Say I wanted to jump to the end of the first breakdown and set a cue point there. So I'm gonna use my finger to jump to that point. There's the end of the breakdown, and I'm gonna press the cue button there to set a new cue there. Check it sounds good. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm going to press memory now. So now I've got those two cue points set in memory, and now I can use the cue loop call buttons to jump between them. and then I'm immediately at the place that I want to be at in the track. And the important thing about this is that when you load the track again, these points are all going to be marked on the track. So it's a very quick and easy way of moving between the places in the track that you want to go to. And you can delete those as well. When you're sat at a cue point, just press delete and that cue point is now deleted, and you can see that one has disappeared from there. So finally on cues, I want to show you a really useful function called auto cue. So auto cue will automatically put a cue point at the first loud part of a track for you when you load it without you having to do anything. It can be really useful if you use cue points mainly to get the first beat of the track ready, because most of the time this will get it right. To turn auto cue on, you hold down this button here with time mode and auto cue on it. Now, one thing I forgot to tell you earlier is time mode. So I touched the clock on the screen there to move the time between time elapsed and time remaining. This is another way of doing it if you don't want to do it like that. But if you hold this down, then you get auto cue lighting up here. That word auto cue there, hold it down again, it will turn off underneath a hot cue. We'll talk about the auto hot cue in a minute. So now it says auto cue. So that means that when I load a track, let's pick another track, let's pick that one there, load it. You're going to get a cue point set where it thinks the track's first beat or the first main part of the track is. And indeed it's decided on this one, because there isn't a beat at the beginning of this track, that there is the place. You see there's a cue automatically set there. So when I press play, that track begins. But let's go pick another one. Hopefully we'll pick one, I'm picking them randomly here with a beat. Let's load that one up. So here it's put the track at the beginning, the auto cue there. Again, it's quite near the beginning of the track. It's the beginning of the percussion. And let's do it with another one. Let's pick that one there. And here it's put an auto cue right on the first beat there. This can be useful if tracks have got kind of like strings at the beginning and then a beat kicks in, because it'll kind of like grab that beat for you and make sure that you're not playing a load of silence at the beginning of a track. If there's a few seconds where not much happens at the beginning of the track. And if I turn that off and then go load another track, you'll see that it hasn't done that for me. Let's load that one there. There's no cue at the beginning of this track, and that indeed has got a load of nothing, right? And you can change the music level that the player will regard as silence for this function by holding down the utility button and going into the utility menu, and then from here scrolling down to auto cue level, and then choosing your decibels level there as to what silence is regarded as. If you find that this is constantly getting the cue points, the auto cues set at the wrong place for you. Let's move on to look at looping, which is one of the most powerful features of modern DJ equipment, and the CDJ-3000 has got loads of good ways of using loops. Now, the classic way of using loops is to set them manually. In, out. And there's my loop. It sounds pretty good, but the end point looks like it might be a little bit early. It's cutting off the end of the beat that I tried to loop. So there's ways of adjusting these points. So I'm going to look at the in point first by holding this button down here. And you can see that that in fact was a little bit early, and I can use the search buttons to move my in point to exactly at the beginning of the beat. And let's do the same for the out point. Hold the button down, it freezes the waveform, and I can use search, or I can use the jog wheel, doesn't matter what you use. And you can hear the difference as I move before and after the beat. That is perfect. While we're here, let me just show you what lots of DJs like to do. I'm sure you've heard DJs doing this. They use this creatively. But anyway, there's our loop. That sounds good now. To exit a loop, you press this button here. And to jump back into the same loop, press it again. Now this is cool, but there are better ways of setting loops nowadays. Usually it's easier just to press one of the auto loop buttons, 4 or 8. That's got me the same outcome, but one touch and it's automatically perfect because it's given me a perfect 4 beat loop. I could do the same with an 8 beat loop. Now once you're in a loop, you can halve and double its length by pressing the 4 or 8 buttons. They've got half and double written underneath them. There's a double, sorry, a half, another half, we're down to 1 beat now. Half a beat. I'm sure you've heard DJs doing this too, it's a classic effect, and then you press the reloop exit button to get out of the loop. So another way of getting loops playing is to hit the beat loop button at the top here, which brings up this panel. And from here, we can dial in a loop. So I could go straight to a half beat loop, like that, or a quarter, back to 1. And there's a second bank of values here. These are all basic half and double values, but there's a second bank of values here by pressing this 1, 2, which are a little bit more esoteric. For instance, I've got a triplet value there. Just gives you some various things that you can play with once you're getting a little bit flash with loops. So when you've got a loop you like, you might want to save that loop. And again, just like saving cues, we just press memory and the loop gets saved. It says memory and there's a marker there to show the loop is saved. And then if I set another loop later on in the track and press memory, I can save that one again. And then I can move between my loops using the cue loop call buttons, just like you can with cue points. Now you've probably noticed the hot cue buttons, and if you come from a DJ controller background, you know that hot cues are the way to be using cues nowadays, and CDJs have caught up. The hot cue systems on this particular CDJ is really good. Let's have a look then. So you've got these buttons across the top here, these 8 hot cues, and they're letters A to H. And these can be set really easily just by pressing them. So if we're playing our track, set a hot cue there. Set another one there. I can jump between them just by pressing them. You notice how it continues to play the track when I press the hot cue in a way that this cue doesn't. Remember, this cue stops and waits. Even if the track stopped when I press the hot cue, it'll start playing immediately from it. It makes them a lot more creative because you can stutter the track like I'm doing here, and you can just almost live remix it by using the cues. Let's set another one where the beat comes in here. You'll notice they're all lighting up in green. You can change this to be multicolored if you want, but by default they're green. I can jump back to that beginning one. And move between them like that. If I want to set a loop on one of these, there's a loop. Let's set it down to a little loop like that and put it on there. So now, whenever let's get out of that. Whenever I press my hot cues, it'll jump to the cue and play it. But whenever I press that, it'll jump to that loop and set it going. And again, it can be creative. In a way that you just can't do easily using the kind of more standard controls. So hot cues are very useful for creative ways of using cues and loops. Now, if you want to delete any of these, you press the call delete button here and you just press the ones you want to delete, like that. And now they're completely clear, ready for me to start setting new ones in my positions. So one thing worth bearing in mind is that this has to be turned on to work. In the DJ settings, you have to go to hot cue auto load, and this has to be set to Rekordbox setting, assuming you have your Rekordbox set to auto load hot cues when you export your USB drive, or just to plain on there. The reason for this, the reason you can turn this off, and if you did turn this off, what would happen is when you load a track, it won't load the hot cues that you previously saved with that track. The reason for that is that older CDJs were quite slow. So if you had like 8 cues and loops all set there, then they would take ages to load, and you'd be like, oh, God's sake, I've got to mix this track in, the hot cues are still loading. These are a lot faster. So really there's no reason why you just wouldn't leave that turned on all the time nowadays. Now beat jump is new here, and it's really cool. It jumps forwards and back through the track by a set number of beats, which as you're about to see, can be really useful. So to set the beat jump value, you hit the shortcut button and then you press 32 beats, 16 beats, 64 beats, whatever you want. 32 beats is 8 bars of music. It's a very common section of music, will be 32 beats or 8 bars long. So let's leave ours set there, and I'll kind of try and demonstrate to you why this can be really cool. So our line here and here is showing we're at the beginning of the track. Let's use beat jump to jump 32 beats into the track, another 32, another 32, another 32, we're at the beginning of the breakdown. 4 sets of 8 bars or 4 sets of 32 beats is very usual to lead up to a breakdown. A breakdown can often be 8 long, and you can see I'm using the beat jump to go from the beginning of the breakdown to the end of the breakdown. The next section is going to be 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's the next breakdown. That's going to be another one, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 bars of outro. The whole track has been constructed around these 8-bar sections, which is totally normal for house music. Some pop music will be 4-bar sections, and some trance music and so on will be maybe 16-bar sections. All that can be set in that shortcut section here. 16, 32, and then you can go to smaller values as well. What's useful about this is when you're playing a track, let's go back to the beginning of that track. When you're playing a track and you want to move forward in the track, maybe you find the intro boring, you just want to skip that whole intro. By tapping beat jump a couple of times, we can move 2 sets of 8 bars forwards. And suddenly we're keeping time, the beats haven't slipped, there hasn't been any kind of train crashing, but we're much nearer to the breakdown. Now, if we want to skip that breakdown, because the dance floor doesn't want a breakdown, when we get to the beginning of the breakdown, we just tap it again. And I've just skipped the whole breakdown. Now, equally, if I wanted to make that breakdown twice the length, let's skip forward to the next one. Notice how I just skipped out most of this whole long section of boring music here to the next breakdown. Here's the breakdown. Now this is an 8-bar breakdown. Now let's say this hits, and possibly because I missed out the last one on the dance floor, everyone was really waiting for a breakdown, and I want to double the length of it. When the breakdown hits the end, I can just hit the beat jump back button. And now it's jumped back to the breakdown to play it again. So the importance of these is they jump backwards and forwards by recognized lengths of musical sections, and therefore it keeps the dance floor happy because you're not skipping beats. Everything's happening where it should happen, and assuming the track hasn't got an awful lot going on in it, obviously if there's lots of singing and recognizable bits, it might sound a bit weird jumping backwards and forwards. This can be a good way of manipulating the playing tracks and getting to where you want to be in them. To shorten or lengthen tracks is a typical way of using it. So we're kind of doing this blind. We know that we're set to 32 beats here, so that's cool. But apart from the lines here, we're not seeing very much going on. You can actually turn on beat jump here to see the controls here, and then you can use these controls to jump as well, and then you've got more choice. So I can immediately jump 8 beats back or forward. And by using the 1, 2 here, I can do smaller values. So let's say I've mixed a track in and I realize I'm a beat out on my beat mix. This track's a beat in advance of the other one. And I'm like, problem. Well, I can quickly jump a beat back here to get myself back into time there, again, without having to use the jog wheel to do that kind of stuff. And there's other creative uses for this as well. So 2 ways of accessing beat jump, using the buttons and using the button up here to bring up the beat jump controls here, and then using the touch screen to do it that way. You can combine beat jumps with loops and then take the whole loop up and down the track by these set amounts, which can be pretty cool. So let's set a loop going. 1 beat loop there. Hold down the beat jump button, and that whole loop, that whole single beat is moving backwards and forwards in the track. That particular trick can be really cool with acapellas, because an acapella is going to have loads of different vocals throughout it, and if the acapella is one that people know, then you can be taking bits of the song and chopping them up and moving around and looping them, and it sounds familiar, but yet it sounds totally different because you're keeping it all in time here, but it's something people have never heard before. And finally, if you want to get really advanced and you want to do all of this blind, then you don't even have to turn on the beat jump to change the length of that beat jump value. You press the Call Delete button here, and then you press beat jump and it'll halve or double the set length. So keep pressing that there, go into shortcut, and you'll see we're right down at the half value there. And staying in here to show you, there you go. See, I'm moving through it like that. One of my favorite performance functions is slip mode. Slip mode silences the track as soon as you start doing something like scratching or hitting hot cues and stuff. But as soon as you've finished, it starts the track playing again from where it would have been had you not touched it. So this is an easy one to demonstrate. Let's just start the track playing, and I'm going to do a bit of scratching. Now obviously what I'm doing here is stopping the track playing. going backwards as I scratch and forwards again, utterly ruining any rhythm going on in the track. You know, your dance floor would have their hands on their hips and they'd be staring at you with daggers at this point. But if I turn slip mode on and then do a bit of scratching, you can hear that underneath all of my scratching, the track's continuing to play. And so everything sounds really nice and in time. It works with cue points and it works with playing the track backwards even. So if I were to turn slip mode off, there's actually a slip reverse function on here, this reverse button, remember this? If I press reverse, it just goes backwards and then forwards again. If I press slip reverse, it's effectively turning on the slip button while reversing the track. Now this one here is really commonly used when there's curse words coming up in a track, because as soon as the curse word's about to hit, you press slip reverse, it plays the track backwards instead of playing the curse word, and when you take your hand off slip reverse, which is a momentary control, you've gone past the curse word and so it doesn't show in the track. It's often called the censor button on other DJ gear. So this is a great function for being creative because it just gives you some extra options. And one of the big ones with it, let's turn slip mode back on here, is beat loop. So beat loop here. If I were to just mess around with loops over the top of a playing track, it's going to sound really weird. But if I have beat loop on, it sounds really musical and a lot of fun. Let's have a listen. And the reason that sounds musical, just again, is that this is continuing to play the track underneath as I do this. And you can actually see that on the waveform here. Let's just put a loop on with my finger and I'll hold it there. So the loop's held where that first line is, but you can see the track itself is continuing to, in inverted commas, play here. So I could continue to mess around with this loop. Watching this down here, and then take it off when it hits a drop or whatever. And this is a way of visually seeing what's going on, the two lines diverging, and then you can tell where the track would have been had you not messed around with slip. One thing about slip mode, remember to turn it off when you're finished. It's one of the classic DJ errors. Your decks are behaving all weirdly, you're trying to use cue points, you're trying to get to the right place, and it's just doing its own thing. Often it's because you've left slip mode switched on by mistake. This button here is the beat sync button, and this will sync this deck with whichever deck is the master deck if I press beat sync on this deck. So let's talk a little bit now about what we mean by master deck and what we mean by beat sync, because it actually does two things when you press the beat sync button. We like to call them tempo matching and beat matching. So I'll talk about these things now. So let's just go through a real world situation. You're playing a track to your audience on this deck here, and you want to play a track to them on the other deck, and you want to use beat sync to get everything nicely lined up, the beats and the tempo. So this deck could be set anywhere, could be set to any BPM, and the track you just loaded could be at any BPM. By pressing beat sync, it locks this track to the same BPM that the other one is playing at, which is 120.1 in this case. Not only that, if I press play on this new track, it locks the beats together as well. So by moving the fader here across, you can hear that both songs are totally in time with each other. Now, the deck that you start will become the master deck, and the deck you mix into next will become the master deck. So you don't really have to worry too much about this master deck functionality. So let's say I was performing a real mix here, and I end up on this track, I stop this one playing, that one automatically becomes the master deck. So then when I load a new track over on this deck, I don't have to worry about which one is the master and so on. I just press beat sync and it's going to sync up okay, using the other one as the master deck. You only really need to worry about which one is the master deck when you've got like 3 or 4 of these things all going at once, and even then it tends to work itself out. So that's how Beat Sync works. There's a couple of things that are going on there though to make very clear. It's not only lining up the BPMs, i.e. the tempo, but it's also lining up the beats. So what happens if you kind of unline those beats? Well, let's have a go, let's find out. This track's playing away here. I want to mix this one in. Get myself ready. Both playing together now. Because I've got Beat Sync on, they're nicely synced. What if I just jog this one? Throw it out, use the nudge function that we know about. Okay, they're both now at different phrases. The beats aren't lining up. And if I play them together, they sound terrible. But they're still at the same BPM. It hasn't altered the speed, it's just altered the way the beats are lined up. And a quick tap of the Beat Sync button, which is now flashing, will turn it off, tap it again to turn it on, and it will line them up again for us. So you can still make adjustments, and if the Beat Sync button is flashing, the reason it's flashing is to tell you that it doesn't think that they are lined up beat to beat, but they're still playing at the same speed. Now, when it comes to the speed of the tracks, again, let's just do this little mix again. When it comes to the speed of the tracks, what if you wanted to change the speed? Well, there's both my tracks playing together. You can only alter the speed by using the speed control on the one that's got master written on it. It's now speeding them both up and both down together. But if I try and alter the speed on a deck that isn't the master, it will immediately tell me tempo change is not possible with sync on. And this is in order to keep things simple, especially when you've got more than 2 decks, 3 or 4 or whatever. Now, what happens if you stop this track being in sync with that one by turning Beat Sync off, and this tempo fader is in the wrong place because of the speed that was being played here? Well, let's have a look. This track here is actually at 122 BPM. It's playing at the moment at 120.7. What happens if I move the tempo fader? Well, nothing. Look, I'm moving it down and nothing's happening. Why? Because in order for the tempo fader to work on a deck which has just been unsynced from another one, you need to move its tempo fader to the position on the fader that it would have been at if it had been playing at the tempo that this one forced it to play at because she was synced. And in this instance, it's 120.7 on the master. So once we get to there we go. As soon as I got to 120.7, it took over, and I can now speed up and slow down this track all the way back down to way below there, or much higher again. The really important thing to know here is that this will simply not work with tracks that haven't been pre-analyzed in the Rekordbox software. And just to reiterate what I said at the very beginning here, you must analyze your music in Rekordbox if you want to use it with the CDJ-3000s. So here's a cool feature called instant doubles. Let's get this track playing. I can put the track that's playing here over onto this deck and have it playing at exactly the same speed and in the same place by holding down instant doubles, which is the Beat Sync button, but you just keep your hand on it like this. You see that this is now loaded on here? There's one of them. There's the other one. And in the middle, you can hear what's called a phasing effect. When you have 2 copies of exactly the same thing playing together, you quite often get this, it's quite a nice effect really. And you can actually accentuate that by throwing one of them out very slightly. But anyway, I digress. To quickly put a track from one deck to another and have it playing at the same place, at the same speed, then you just hold down the Beat Sync button until it loads and starts playing. Now you may have wondered, what is it that the CDJ-3000s use to line up the beats when you hit the sync button? Or indeed, how does the unit know what a perfect 4-beat loop is when I hit the loop button? Well, it does all this using something called Beatgrids. A Beatgrid is a grid laid over the top of your tracks, showing the CDJ-3000 where the bar and where the beat markers are, where these things lie, and then it can line those things up. So let's have a look at it. The Beatgrid is shown to you on a track by the lines that you can see here. The little lines on the beats, and even I can't see from where I'm stood, never mind you on the camera, but the little red lines that show the beginning of a bar and little kind of white lines that show the beginning of a beat. So that's the beginning of a bar there, I can just about tell. So the idea is that you have those things set beforehand, but if you do need to adjust them, holding down this will give you a few rudimentary controls. One of them is snap grid. So what this will do is take the cue point that you set. Let's just get out of there again. So let's say that you're playing on this track and you set a cue point right there at the beginning. There's your cue. You know that's the first beat of the first bar of the track. So you can click snap grid cue and it will line up the first bar, first marker to that cue point, and then hopefully the rest of them will fall into place. One of the big problems with Beatgrids on DJ equipment is that sometimes it will get the timing wrong in a very predictable way. It will say that a track that's 120 beats per minute is actually 60 beats per minute, or a track that is 200 beats per minute, very fast dubstep or whatever, it'll come in at 100. So this is the biggest error, and that's actually very easy to fix because there is a half and a double button here as well. So that's halving and doubling the BPM of the track, and the lines are becoming twice as frequent or half as frequent depending upon which one you press. And you can also move the whole grid left or right. So if I'm sat there looking at this and I can see it's just the whole thing's just slightly out, I can use this control here and hopefully you can see the whole grid is moving there. And if you think you've messed it up, there's a reset button there as well. As I said, the best thing to do is get this right beforehand in Rekordbox, but there are those controls there. If you spot something obvious that's wrong, it's normally a quick doubling or halving of the BPM, or the first beat is in the wrong place, and if you put that in the right place, everything else falls into place after that. Those kind of things are pretty easy to correct using the Beatgrid functions directly on the player. I've left the best till last, which is key sync. To me, key sync is done brilliantly on Pioneer DJ gear. It includes extra keys that it regards as a fit. And that means that when you hit key sync, it's going to give you a result that is likely to sound good compared to the key sync on other systems. If you're non-musical, look away now and come back in about 20 seconds. If you are musical, what it's doing is including the relative keys of the subdominant and the dominant key as compared to the currently playing track. And that gives it a wider spectrum to choose from when it's key syncing, and that means it doesn't have to move the pitch of the original track, sorry, of the new track, up or down more than a couple of semitones, unlike key sync on other software that can move it like up to 6 or 7 semitones, and then it sounds terrible. Right, welcome back everyone else. Key sync sounds great. It's going to give you good results. It will musically match your tracks. Here's how you use it. Head into the track that you've just loaded that you want to key sync with the one you're currently playing and tap key sync, and you'll notice that the key here will possibly change, but key sync will line up. Now that actually has changed. It's altered the key of this track by 1 or 2 notes in either direction so that it lines up nicely with this one musically as well as beat-wise, and therefore is more likely to be a good mix. Simple. Turn it off by pressing master tempo again if you don't like the sound of it, and it will go back to where it was. So that's it. That's it for key sync. I do want to show you how you can alter the key manually of a track though. So let's just get this track playing, and I'm going to touch key shift at the top here, and then these controls come up, and I can move up a semitone at a time while not altering the tempo, all the way to a whole octave, and the same in the other direction, and hit the middle to reset it instantly to where it should be. To use your CDJs with computer software, such as Rekordbox or Serato or DJ Pro AI or others, you need to do a couple of things. And once you've done those things, it works like a big DJ controller, and you can control your software just like you could with a DJ controller. So it's another option for using them. So there's a couple of things. The first thing we need to do is plug in via USB both of our players, or all of our players. You can't use the Ethernet network for this, and you can't plug into one player and expect the Ethernet network to kind of like send all the stuff down one cable. You need a separate cable for each of your units. So 2 cables, plug them in, get them into a USB hub if that helps you, and then plug it into your computer. That's step 1. Step 2 is to get the audio set up correctly on your computer to recognize two of these players. Now, if you're a Windows user, you get Windows drivers. They're over on the Pioneer website. You need these anyway to use the system, but just check you've got the right ones. Also, look at the documentation that comes with your DJ software to see if there's anything extra you need to do there to get them talking to each other. On a Mac, you need to set up an audio aggregation device. And if you don't know how to do that, you don't actually need any extra software for this. It's to tell the unit to treat both the CDJs as one audio output device. But if you don't know how to do that without using software, there's a tiny little software app over on the website which you download. You don't even have to install it. One click and it will set that device up for you, and then you'll be able to see the CDJs as an option in your output, audio output. So just go get that, click on it, and that's all it will take. So that's the audio setup, and that is the units plugged in. Now you need to launch your DJ software. On launching your DJ software, there's a chance it will kind of ask you and double check that you want to use the CDJs, which it often does when you plug new gear in. Obviously you're going to say yes there. You might want to just check that your settings are correct on your software by heading to your preferences, and it's going to be slightly different on all software, but what we're looking for is audio to be set to the Pioneer CDJ and XDJ and not to your, your built-in speakers or whatever. And that means it will come down into the CDJs and through your mixer like normal. So now the final part of our setup is to tell the units what decks to work with on your DJ software, because there's two units here. Normally a controller is just one cable into the software and it kind of all works it out. So I'm going to click on the source and I'm going to choose deck 1 here. On the other one then, so my DJ app source, which is now available to me, of course, because I plugged the USB in. Again, click on it and then select deck 2 there. And that's telling the software that this is deck 1, left-hand deck, this is deck 2, the right-hand deck. And now it works. So I'm going to start browsing here in the library. You can see we're going up and down through the tracks here. You can see over on the DJ software, we're going up and down through the tracks there. I can click on a track to load it. You can see it's loaded up on the DJ software, and it's also loaded up here on my unit. I can do everything that you can do on the CDJs without a computer, with a computer. The audio is coming through fine. I've got all my controls here. I've got my hot cues. I've got my key sync and my key shift, and all the stuff that you're used to seeing is now working over on here. And I can do everything that I'm used to doing without the computer, with the computer. No talk through of any unit like this, of course, would be complete without us taking a comprehensive tour of all the settings, all those little menu items that you might have wondered about. So hold down the utility menu button until you get this, and here are the settings. So you have your settings options down here that you can choose from, and then clicking into one will allow you to pick an item, and clicking into that item will allow you to make the change. So the first one is load lock. This decides whether you can load a track onto a playing deck or not. Quantized beat value is the value that the quantize button will work to. So we haven't talked about quantize in too much detail. What quantize does when you turn it on is make sure that anything you do happens on the nearest beat or fraction of a beat. So in other words, if you press a Q button or you press a loop button, if you engage anything that has got some time factor associated with it in your DJing, it will snap it to the nearest beat, and just keep everything tight and make your DJing sound a little bit more polished, at the expense of you not being able to do things in exactly real time, because it's always putting it to the nearest beat. And this is where you can select how granular that is. So you can have it all the way down to like an eighth of a beat or a whole beat. That's where that happens. The beat jump value we've talked about. I've shown you how to do this in the shortcut menu. We'll look at the shortcut menu again in a second. Hot cue auto load decides, we talked about this one a little while ago, whether or not it loads all the hot cue info when you load a track. Hot cue color, this is the colors that you set for your individual hot cues in Rekordbox. Is it to show those on the buttons or not? Auto cue level, this will decide where the auto cue is placed, or if it uses the first set cue point. That's what memory means on there. Vinyl speed adjust, we've talked about vinyl speed adjust. Play mode, whether it plays just a single track that you're playing or continues to the next track in the playlist. So down into the display settings, these are all the settings to do with the colors and lights and so on. You've got your LCD brightness there, your jog LCD brightness. You can also choose the language, whether a screensaver kicks in, and also calibrate the touch screen so it works to your liking. Display indicator, this will decide whether when you press the slip button, it flashes on the display. You can have the mixer that you've got connected to it showing you which of the current decks is playing if you have a mixer that's compatible with that. And you can also set the brightness of the jog ring and whether the jog ring indicator is on or off. Pro DJ Link, this is the stuff to do with getting your computer and your players all working nicely together, player number and stuff like that. Then onto the system settings, you can have it set so that it has auto standby or not. Output attenuation is just the overall output volume. You can give a name to your history library. We looked at the history playlist, didn't we, earlier? Well, this is where you can name history. And then you can reset there to default. And then finally, there's just information about your system here. This is telling you the license number you're running, the IP address of the unit on the network, the serial and your license and so on. And finally, for our tour of the unit, let's just have another look at the shortcut settings. We've already looked at most of these. Hold down, touch rather, the shortcut button to get to them. And these are the things you can change here. So the waveform and phase meter decides if the meter that we see at the top of the screen here is the waveform from the other deck or the phase meter from the other deck. You can just do that by tapping on here as well, but this will decide what it is by default when you're not in this menu and you're over here, whether it's by default this one here or whether it's by default the actual waveform. Then the Hotkey auto load, this is something we just looked at a second ago in the main utility menu. You've got another option for it here. Your brightness of the jog and the LCDs, again, this is just because it's something people like to adjust a lot and it saves you going into the utility to do it. Again, we have the quantized beat value and the beat jump value here. We've looked at those. Waveforms we've looked at. The waveform current position is something we haven't looked at. This is just a small subtle change on the waveform that you can do. So you see the current position on the waveform is here. This is the bit that we're playing. That's because we've set it to left. If we set that back to center, then the waveform current position is going to be back in the middle. It's a personal choice. If it's on the left, it means you can see more of the current track as it's arriving. So you get a little bit more foresight into what's coming in a few seconds time. So that can be adjusted in there. And you can also load and save the settings to USB from directly in here as well. We looked at a different way to do that a little bit earlier on. I've just given you a comprehensive tour of all the features of the Pioneer DJ CDJ-3000 system. If you have ordered this, if you've got this and you're scratching your head a little bit, or you're just curious, or you're someone who's been asked to play in a club and you wanted to get genned up, I hope you found a lot of interest here. But you know, knowing how to use your gear is only one part of being a DJ. The way we teach DJing here at Digital DJ Tips and the way we teach it in our best-selling book, Rock the Dance Floor, is to divide it into the 5 big areas: gear, music, techniques, playing out and promoting yourself. And this is just one part of learning about the gear. You also need to understand about how everything fits together, about audio routing and about gain staging and about all the other geeky things that a DJ is expected to know. But then there's the other 4 big areas as well. There's the music, there's knowing how to think about music, how to prepare music, where to get music, how to program music for DJ sets. There's the actual techniques of DJing, what you do on the gear to produce a great DJ set. And then there's how to perform, how to react to a crowd, how to know what to play in any situation, and how to behave behind the decks when you're in public. And finally, of course, there's promoting yourself, because if you can't get the gigs, then you're not actually doing the DJing, right? So all these things come together, these 5 big areas. And the beauty is that if you work on all 5 of them, they have a multiplier effect. And most DJs who are starting out tend to only concentrate on one area, and that's why they get stuck. They're generally will be the mixing. Oh, I want to learn to mix. So they concentrate on that, but they're neglecting the music, and they're neglecting their knowledge of the gear, and they're neglecting thinking about what to do when they get that first chance to play in public. And indeed, they might not even be looking for gigs because they think that they need to get better and better and better behind closed doors in order to finally be able to play out. And that's not the case. You should be getting out early and often if you want to improve as a DJ. So Digital DJ Tips, we'll give you a copy of this book for becoming our latest member. We're the world's leading DJ school. We work with Jazzy Jeff, Laidback Luke, DJ Angelo, and many others. So if you want to learn from us, if you want to learn from tutors like James Hype, who's recently produced a DJing and a production course with us, or indeed from all our other areas that we cover, from live streaming to mixtapes to scratching to setting up a DJ business, you're in the right place. But the first step is simply to join Digital DJ Tips. It's completely free, and when you join, you get a copy of the book. You also get a copy of our gear guide to stop you making expensive mistakes when you're buying your gear. So do sign up, digitaldjtips.com/join. And if you're serious right here, right now about improving your DJing and you want to take the next step with us, there are two that I can recommend for you. Number one, which is the one I recommend to most DJs, is our complete DJ course. The complete DJ course is a phenomenal investment in your DJing. It covers thoroughly those 5 areas I just talked about. It's good for you at any level of DJing and whatever music or equipment you want to use. And it takes you from beginner through to being able to play professional sounding gigs in public. So get the complete DJ course from Digital DJ Tips. There is a link in the description of this video where you can go and find out more about that. But the second course I would recommend for you as a user of the Pioneer CDJ-3000s is our Rekordbox Made Easy course, because these things effectively are just designed to work with what you do in the software. And if you are not preparing your music properly in the software and you're not taking advantage of all the features of the software, then when you come to DJ on these, you're going to be missing out on half of the fun of them. So Rekordbox Made Easy will get you up to speed with the software that ultimately powers these things. Listen, it's been a joy to help you to learn about the CDJ-3000s. I hope you've enjoyed it. But meanwhile, from me, Phil, here in the Digital DJ Tips studio, get good, get out there, make the moments, and I'll see you again very soon.